latest book, User Tested, is a manifesto for kind of bringing humanity or the human factor back to business in a time where businesses and executives are obsessed with data and technology keeps separating us, or at least physically. So you are publishing a book, you just published a book to say that in order to delight real people, companies should learn how to extract real feedback. Why did you take such a stance? What motivated you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that actually motivated me. One is that this is an area that I've been involved in my entire career, and it was something I went to school for. I have my master's degree in human factors and information design. And so I feel very passionate about the topic. And this is what I've done for my entire career. Everything from spending time in labs, if you will, observing customers using different experiences, to having interviews with customers one-on-one as human beings and sharing that back with stakeholders and teams, and, really representing the customer as a human being. Like, that's just a core kind of tenet of my career and what I believe to be very important. And I think the other part of sort of the impetus for the book is that when you look around at business and you look around at how companies operate, I think we used to, when before sort of digital came and sort of overtook everything, we used to be able to have one-on-one conversations with our customers or see them face to face. Like if you owned a hardware store, you could talk to your customers when they came in. Sam Walton used to walk the aisles of Walmart and look for opportunities to ask questions, to understand more about what his customers were actually doing and why. And I think over time, less and less of that is actually happening. As we move more towards digital channels, we are serving our customers differently. And in some cases, when you introduce that digital channel, you create almost a wall between your customers and you as a company, and you don't have that direct interaction. And as part of the shift to digital, we also have all of these new ways to capture information about what our customers are doing, where they're clicking, where they're converting, how they feel about the experience through surveys or other means. But we never really actually connect with our customers as human beings. Well, most don't very regularly. And so with this over-indexing on data, I think we're missing a piece of the puzzle. We don't get that holistic perspective. And so that was a big part of why we decided to write the book, to talk about, one, why this is so important, and two, how to do it, how to make it approachable, how to build it into your workflows, how to build a culture around understanding your customers in many different ways, both with data, but also with, making that human connection and really understanding them as people. I have lots of great stories I'd love to share about how, and this is so powerful to bring it to life. But that was really sort of the thinking behind the book, was really making this an approachable topic that anybody who has a customer can benefit from.
To start with, but also the industry I've been working on most of my adult life, the luxury industry, the human factor is always being extremely relevant. However,
Yes.
just for the sake of playing devil's advocate here, let me tell you that every time I have this conversation with younger people, and especially people working in different sectors, such as the tech sector, they tell me, but you know what? I don't really want to have this conversation with my customers, and I'm not even sure they want to have a conversation with me. So how would you address this point of view?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a little bit of that too. And I think you've got to look at it a couple of different ways. So one is that making the first thing that stands out to me with your example is that the person who is working on behalf of a company creating experiences for their customers is making assumptions about what their customer wants. And whether or not they actually do want to provide feedback. You would be shocked to understand or see people are hungry to be heard. And there's so many different ways that they are being tracked today, and ways that they don't love. I mean, if you think about the last time you picked up your phone and maybe downloaded an app or went to a website and you're being asked, is it okay if we are tracking what you're doing? It's like, how many people like to say yes to that question? Not a whole lot. However, what people want to do is be able to be in control of the feedback that they give you and provide the feedback in a way that's meaningful, and they feel like they're delivering value to you through the content and information that they're giving you. And so I'd be careful with that assumption. I would say that as sort of like a something to consider. If you are making that assumption that your customers don't want to give you feedback or don't want to connect with you to tell you what's important to them in regards to your business, I think that's a really that's a bad assumption to make. And in the sense of not wanting to, on the flip side, not wanting to have these conversations, I would really challenge that. I mean, how else are you going to be sure that you're delivering a great customer experience if you don't truly and intimately know who your customers are? I mean, challenge that assumption, because this is a path to success. If you don't know your customers, you're not going to be delivering an experience that meets their expectations, and you don't have a chance to deliver experience that even exceeds their expectations.
Knowing your customers and customer experience. Talking of which, you mentioned in the book several times the experience economy, a book that Joe Pine wrote in 1998, if I remember correctly. And I had the pleasure of interviewing him in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. And
Awesome.
And I remember among the things that we discussed, he told me, Carlo, I don't think people want less experiences now. They actually crave even more. Now, let me ask you, Janelle, what's an efficient way for companies to measure the wow factor of a customer experience besides Net Promoter Score or traditional surveys that may work or not work?
Yeah, I think we could probably have an entire episode on Net Promoter Score.
Indeed.
I'd be interested to hear Joe's perspective on that too. I need to listen to that episode. It's interesting. I think NPS and other types of surveys where you're capturing feedback after the fact of somebody having an experience with you is, it's helpful in the sense of understanding what the experience was, but it puts you in a very reactive place, right? You're looking at data exhaust, you're looking at what happened, and then you have to go back and address it if it was a poor experience or close the loop or whatever your processes are. You'll know after the fact through NPS or surveys if something was a great experience. You'll likely see that in the data and the feedback, but you don't really know if that's actually going to be the case until you actually launch it and get that feedback. And I think that that's a risky place for businesses to play, which is why I always advocate for looking at experiences before you actually push them live into production or into the environment. So thinking about, how do we actually get feedback on this experience in a way where we're able to learn whether or not it's a great experience or not, and then make adjustments in order for it to perform the best once we bring it live. In terms of measuring it, I've seen lots of different ways to do this. And I think, to be fair, it's a fairly subjective thing. But looking at different factors around exceeding expectations. So putting something in front of a particular customer, having them use it, and then asking them things like, did this meet your expectations? Did it exceed your expectations? Did it not meet your expectations? And asking about those types of factors and attributes can help you understand how the experience is landing. And I think, to be fair, a lot of companies are still working to create good experiences that meet expectations. Delightful experiences, those are few and far between. And, I think there's a lot of work that can be done to even just create, experiences, again, that meet expectations.
Questions are a great tool, not just in business, but in life, to the point that philosophers say it's not the answer, but the question that can change and transform your life. However, we also learn from neuroscience, and this is also something that you mentioned in your book, that people tend to lie when asked direct questions. Perhaps it's not a bad intention, it's not a lie that is born from bad intention, but they tend not to say the truth or the integral truth. Why is that? And how can we extract the truth?
Yeah, there's so many interesting cognitive biases in the ways that our mind works, where, to your point, it's not ill intent, it's just the way that we perceive the world and also how we respond to different situations and environments. I mean, sometimes when you ask people, so this is actually why what I've been working on my entire career is so important. It's the fact that what people say they do or will do is often very different from what they actually do, which is why you can't always rely on what people tell you. It's why it's so important to observe people, whether it's in the real world, whether it's using an experience, whether it's over time. Maybe you're trying to understand, how do they go about the car shopping, purchasing a new vehicle? What does that look like to them? Instead of asking them, oh, this is what I typically do. I look at some websites, I do some test drives, I compare financing options. Instead of asking them about that, it's actually much more effective to observe them over time. And yes, that's expensive and it is, a time commitment, but you're going to get better, richer, truer data than just asking people. Now, that being said, ways to sort of get around it or think about, how do you ask these types of questions when that there's likely going to be perhaps a little distance between what they say and reality. Some things that I've done in the past that can be helpful is ask people to describe the last time they did an activity and what that was like, and hopefully it's fresh enough where they're able to recall. What I always caution people about asking is future behavior. So, would you buy this? Is this something that's interesting? Is this something that you think you would use in the future? It's like, those are so dangerous because people don't know. And of course, especially if it's face-to-face, like if you were asking me, Carlo, like, hey, I just created this new product. Do you think this is something that you would be interested in or would find useful? What do you think I'm going to say? I'm going to say, yeah. Or at least if I give you some feedback around, well, I'm not really, maybe, but I could see this being useful in this scenario or this, like I'm going to temper my feedback even if I feel as though it's not that useful to me, because we're human beings and we like to be nice to each other. And I mean, that's a very simplified reason of why, but a lot of times it is that people know what you want to hear, whether that's in an interview or in a survey question. And especially when you write a survey question that's written in a way that is sort of encouraging people to answer positively, like it's almost like this please the teacher syndrome, which is like what I like to call it, is sort of like they know what you want to hear. And so they're likely going to tell you that, which again is why it's so important to not just talk to people and ask them, but actually observe them in real life and make sure that you're understanding truly how they engage with something, how they make decisions, and how they decide to do business with you or not.
Yeah, I so much agree with you, especially because coming from a creative industry, I don't even think it's the consumer's duty to know what they will want in the future. I mean, surprise me, give me something to dream about, but don't ask me what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Right, exactly. Well, there's I know Amazon is used in a lot of examples, but there's a shareholder letter where Jeff Bezos says, no one was asking for the Amazon Alexa. I mean, if we would have went to our potential consumers and said, would you like a speaker that sits on your kitchen counter in the shape of a Pringles can that talks that you can talk to, is that something you'd want? People would probably say no, but that's not how they brought that product to market. They recognized a need, they saw an opportunity, and they built a product that met that need. And you can see, just based on the adoption of that product, people didn't know they needed it, but once it was there, they had pulled it into their life and adopted it because it met an unmet need.
Talking of customers, there's a statement in your book that made an impression on me. When you say, happy customers make for happy employees, and miserable customers can cause mass employee exodus. And this makes so much sense to me. I started in sales, so I've known from day one that when customers are happy, everything somehow works in the company. But the narrative today is different. I mean, you open LinkedIn in the morning or whatever industry publication, and you will see something like, take care of your employee first, the customers will follow, and they'll take care of your employees. But we also know that it's the other way around. Can you explain your point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. To be fair, I think it's a cycle. Like it's a circle, right? And I think that when you don't empower, so here's the thing. It is true that happy customers make for happy employees, but you have to have happy employees to make happy customers. Like these things are so interlocked, and there are things that companies can do and should do to ensure that employees are empowered to do right by the customer. So I'll give you an example. You may have heard it before. The Ritz-Carlton is very well known for this, and I know they're a luxury hotel brand, but they actually give their, frontline employees a budget on, I think it's an annual basis, to make decisions and do right by the customer in the moment. So you've probably heard the stories of, a young child leaving their precious little blankie in a hotel room, and then the employee finding it and choosing to, ship it overnight using their budget because they understand and can empathize with the customer and do something to make that situation better, make the customer feel very valued and appreciated. And of course, what does that lead to? Loyal customers coming back to continue to stay on those properties because they know they're going to be taken care of. It's a very sort of small example, but when you set your employees and your company up to do that, that not only makes happy customers, but you can imagine that employee felt like they were making somebody stay as well. Everybody likes to help people. And when you're put in positions where you're not given the opportunity to do right by the customer, you don't have those means to make it better really quickly, it can start to be really degrading and demotivating over time, especially if then you have to deal with an unhappy customer, right? So not only do you feel bad about not meeting their needs, but then you have to manage somebody who's miserable or upset with you. So, I think to answer your question, it's a cycle. And I don't think it's one way or the other. It's all connected, both employee experience and customer experience.
I agree with you. Now, let's talk about collecting data. So we all agree that data has to be collected, but you mentioned bias before. There are biases that interfere when we make decisions, but biases also interfere when executives, teams read data. What are the best practices and perhaps some case histories of successes or failures in which companies didn't interpret the data in the correct way?
Interesting. So you're right in the sense that what I find so interesting about this work is that if both you and I were to observe somebody maybe making a purchase online or going to a store to find an item to purchase, and we watched, and observed for 20 minutes or so what the experience was like. what you walk away with and what I walk away with are going to be two very different things, because we both have lived experiences and perspectives and filters that we see the world through. And so it's what I find to be very critical in this type of, and by the way, like that is not something that that I've uncovered. There's bodies of work that show when teams look at the same experience and ask customers to use that experience, and then they all go back and create a punch list of the things that they need to improve, those punch lists often don't overlap. And so that's a whole body of knowledge done by Rolf Molik in my industry and referenced in the book as well. That all being said, I think the important thing with data interpretation, we might interpret it differently, but the key to getting over that bias, or at least getting to a place where you're all looking at it from the same angle, is to have a discussion about it and talk about it. Talk about what it means. Talk about how you interpreted something versus how somebody else interpreted it. And having diverse teams and diverse perspectives makes this, like, that is the key to ensuring that you're aligning and creating a great experience for everyone. What you don't want is sort of, the same type of person in a room, like all looking at this data and coming at it from very similar life experiences, looking at it holistically from people of different genders and ages and income and professions. And, those types of perspectives are really valuable in order to ensure that you're aligning on and making sure that the team is moving forward with a shared perspective. That all being said, I think bias is something that is always going to be a challenge. And what I have seen to be successful is not just looking at the numbers and the analytics and what's happening, but again, like creating more of that well-rounded story by actually pulling in your customer perspective as sort of a human being. I have a story I'm sure I could share with you, one of my favorite stories around this type of work. So we were working with the AAA organization. So they are a service where, if your car breaks down or you get a flat tire, you call AAA and they come fix it for you. It's been around for over 100 years. They have a particular, so they're not a digital first company. They've since become more digital. And as part of becoming digital, they presented customers with a page on their website of the 3 different plans that they had. So tiers of membership that you can subscribe to. And it was very price and feature led. And there was sort of a belief and bias internally that was the way that you present this information. And you can imagine, when they weren't happy with things like the number of people that were converting in their premium plan, or the number of people who were converting just across the board and at plans in general, because they were so biased towards price, they were playing around with price points. They were playing around with included features. They were looking at this in a very sort of analytical, price-driven way. And what they learned was, when they actually went and talked to customers weren't actually that concerned about price point. What they really cared about was, is this service reliable? If I sign up for it, are they going to show up when I need them? Can I trust that this is something that's going to serve me value? And it was funny because I had the stories in the book, and James Lane, who is the designer that did all of the work around this, told me that design that he created based on that feedback. So he created the design that was more value led and communicated in a way that this was something that was more that was trustworthy and that you can engage with. And then if you click, you can see the pricing, but it led with those values because that was how people made decisions. He told me that design, which he tested with customers, never went live. It sat in a drawer for 2 years. And when he finally got enough buy-in internally, to launch this. Of course, the team was like, no, we're not flipping completely over to this new way to present our plans. Let's do an A/B test. Let's push some traffic towards the price-led page, and then some traffic towards the more value-led page. And this was Memorial Day weekend that they launched this A/B test of 2020, which is one of the biggest travel weekends of the year. And also during the pandemic, many more people were driving versus flying. Like, it was a big weekend for them. And what they saw was that the value-led design completely outperformed the price-led design. And to me, this is a really nice example of I don't know if it's bias in the way that you are thinking about it when you ask me the question, but I think that there's bias for many teams internally to sort of like do things in a way where we've always done it, or in a way that most benefits the business, or in a way that we think about how we should be serving our customers. But when you really open up your aperture and start getting different types of perspectives, especially from your customers, you see that they see the world completely different than you do. And so I guess the point I want to make is biasing towards your customers' perspectives versus what you care about as a business, which is still important, but, you know, making sure that you are showing up for your customers in a way where it shows that you understand what's important to them. That's where you'll see better results, better performance.
Very interesting. Janelle, as we are heading towards the end of our conversation, I'd like to narrow it, if you don't mind, to the luxury industry, just because this
Sure.
podcast is titled Lux and Friends, and many of our listeners work in the luxury industry. Now, based on your experience and your study, what luxury is slightly different because it's an industry that aims at exceeding expectations, creating something customers don't expect yet. So what should a luxury company do to user test, and sometimes also at a very fast pace? What shall a company do to user test their latest collection or their new campaign?
Yeah, good question. And we've worked with a lot of luxury brands as well. What I find fascinating about how decisions are made within some of these companies, and this is a generalization, not I know this isn't true for every company, but a lot of the folks that work in those teams that make those decisions about what products to bring to market, or what new line to deliver, or what campaign's going to resonate. They very often started their career in the storefront, where they were interfacing with customers all the time. And then as they went through their career, they moved more towards, internal teams that aren't in the store all the time, every day, yet they still have that perception of what it was like in the store from decades, in some cases, decades ago. And we have to understand that your customers are shifting and changing all the time as things become more digital, as you start to attract different types of audiences. Like, your core belief of who your customer is, if you haven't talked to them in a while, is likely different than reality. And so I guess to answer your question directly, in terms of how to user test different brand campaigns and different lines, it all starts way before you actually put pen to paper or start designing something. It starts with connecting with your customers at a very human level to understand what are their needs, what's your competition doing, what are they gravitating towards in the market right now, what are their values, what's important to them. I mean, sustainability, I know in e-commerce, is something that's very important to consumers today. How does that translate to luxury brands and luxury products and how you show up in the market? So I would say intimately understanding your customers, and also ensuring that your assumptions, that you challenge your assumptions. And then, of course, before you bring something to market, it's all about, if you have different ideas, making sure that, you could sketch something down on a piece of paper or a napkin and say, like, what are your initial thoughts? Or maybe you have 4 different options of something and you want to get quick feedback and see what are people gravitating towards. Getting that right before you push anything to production, before you push a single pixel on a screen for an ad campaign, understanding the core sort of message that you want to deliver, understanding and validating the product, and what is important to them from the product line as a whole, but also the certain different features and things of that nature that are important. Those are all things that can be validated before you actually invest anything into production. And I think that's where I'd love to see more companies, not just luxury brands, but more companies spending time in that squishy area, validating and getting quick iterative feedback before we commit to something. And then, of course, once you commit, sure, you can get feedback and iterate, but oftentimes those iterations are much more, you're already heading in a certain direction. They're much finer, right? It's just, earlier on, making sure that you're doing due diligence and understanding your customers before you move forward.
Intimately understand your customers. I love that. Now, before I say grazie mille in my native language Italian for this very insightful conversation, there's one last question that I'd like to ask you. Beside your book, User Tested, is there any other book or article or video you would like to recommend for our listeners and viewers to gain more information on how to bring the human factor back to business?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a book that I love, and it stands the test of time. And what I love about it is that it's very practical and has lots of different examples of how this actually happens in business. Because I think what's important to remember, and what I absolutely recognize, is that we all want to do right by the customer. Sometimes we just don't know how, or what the best practices are, or how to operationalize, or how to make this part of what our company does. When you're working with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, this is a massive undertaking. And so one of the books that I love, which was written by Carrie Bodine and Harley Manning, Carrie's an ex-Forrester analyst, and I believe Harley Manning is still there. It's called Outside In. And I love it because it is very practical in terms of, if you are, you've got buy-in, you've got momentum, yes, we want to do this. It's a very practical guide with tons of stories on how to actually make it happen. So I would recommend that book.
Fantastic. Janelle Estes, thank you very much for being on Lux & Friends. Grazie mille.
Thank you so much for having me, Carlo. I really enjoyed our conversation.